One of the challenges installing a big block into a 68 Camaro is getting the headers to fit. We knew we could get the header in the passenger side without any issues, but the header on the driver's side appeared to pose some problems. So we took some microfiber towels, wrapped them around the header, and bungee strapped it to the frame rail and dropped the engine in on top of it, which made the whole process go much more smoothly. Once the engine was bolted to its mounts, we turned our attention to the transmission.
The TCI Super Street Fighter 4L80E electronic transmission is built to handle 875 horsepower, but it's still designed for the street. We'll be controlling it with a fast, easy TCU. We're also using a TCI Street Fighter torque converter with a slightly higher stall speed than stock, so it retains good driving manners but still launches hard.
And one of the biggest things you need to pay attention to when installing an automatic transmission is getting the torque converter properly seated. To determine if it's properly seated, you turn the converter with a gentle pressure on it, and you can usually hear and feel it pop in. And the easiest test is whether or not you can get your fingers between it and the inside of the bell housing. Our cooling system for our Camaro came from Be Cool. It's a Be Cool module which comes with a radiator and a matched set of fans. Nick assembled the fans to the radiator and then attached them to the core support. We set it on the car so we could begin the task of plumbing the transmission cooler, the rest of the vintage air, AC lines and condenser, and the radiator hoses. We're all about the details here at V8TV, and the plug wires were no exception on this car. I made sure to run them very low along the edge of the valve cover and take them behind the valve covers up to our MSD Digital E-Curve distributor. Once I was at the distributor, I cut the wires to the appropriate length and used MSD's specific crimping tool to crimp the plug wire ends onto the wires. Next, Nick took the fuel pump that's supplied in the Fast Easy EFI kit and carefully ground off a place on the rear suspension support box to weld the fuel pump bracket to. After the fuel pump was installed, I was able to start routing the steel fuel lines from the pump to the engine. I like to be very meticulous when I bend steel lines, make sure that all the bends are very precise and crisp, and that everything fits the same or better than the factory would have ever done. To accomplish this, I use a variety of tools. The most important tool is Eastwood's special flaring tool, which provides perfect flares every time. Next thing I did was install the fast throttle body, using some ARP throttle body studs and nuts. Once I had the throttle body installed, I ran the wiring harness from the PCM, which was mounted inside of the car, through the firewall, and ran everything to the appropriate sensors, connecting the temperature sensor, the throttle position, the map, the IAC, and all the injectors. The steel fuel lines can't compensate for any flex between the engine and the chassis, so obviously you need to make some sort of soft fuel line to account for that. We use Earl's ProLite 350 hose and swivel seal hose ends, which are really easy to assemble, and they don't have stainless steel wires in them, so you don't end up poking your fingers all the time. The process is rather simple. You cut your hose to length, you put the nut over the hose, and then you mark on the hose where the nut is stopped. You lube everything up, put the fitting on, and tighten it down, and measure to make sure that your hose is not slid out of the fitting more than 1/16 of an inch. In preparation for the actual starting of the engine, we use some of Royal Purple's break-in oil. It's actually not a synthetic oil, it's a regular mineral oil, but it's specially formulated with extra additives to protect critical engine parts during startup. When we installed the radiator hoses on the Camaro, we used Gates Power Grip heat shrink hose clamps. And these are really cool because they look nice and they're really simple to use. You simply put them on and hit them with a heat gun,
And you're done.
Before we started the engine, we made sure to top off all the fluids in the car. We used all Royal Purple for our oils, using Max Easy for the steering, Max ATF for the automatic transmission, and Max Gear for the rear differential.
We used an MSD Digital E-Curve. MSD supplies some basic instructions, some guidelines on where to start with your curve. There's 2 screws and they're numbered, each notch on them. And you look on a chart where you want your curve to be, and then you align the 2 corresponding numbers on those screws. The Digital E-Curve distributor also features a built-in rev limiter, which I set to a safe 5,500 RPM. One of the most critical things you can do before you start an engine is to prime the oiling system. And on a Chevy, that's relatively simple. You take the distributor out and you use a special priming tool, or you can make your own. In our case, we made our own. We took an old ATI distributor
cut the gear off and cut the top of the distributor off. You drop that in there and you drive it with a drill until you've got sufficient oil pressure showing on the gauge. Once you've had the oil system primed, you drop the distributor back in, set your base timing, and you're ready to fire the engine.